Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sage Advice, where we explore the wisdom that shapes remarkable lives. Today's guest is someone that I hold in deep respect, not just for what she knows, but how she lives. Janany Jayanthikumar is a trauma and attachment expert, a social worker, an educator, and the founder of the Center for Social Work Education. Her work spans some of the most respected institutions in Canada, from CAMH and Sick Kids to the University of Toronto. But what moves me most is how she blends all of that clinical expertise with lived experience. She's raising 3 boys, including 4-year-old twins, and still finds the courage and clarity to help others break intergenerational cycles and create safer, more compassionate spaces. I've invited her here not just to share what she does, but who she is, what she's still learning, and the wisdom she'll one day leave behind. Janany, my friend, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Hamza.
We're going to have a lot of fun. We met in Whistler, BC.
Yes.
We met at a retreat hosted by a mutual mentor, Hamza Khan, right? Shout out to Hamza Khan.
Love her.
Another HK, another Khan, just representing for the rest of us. She had us over there. Well, I was technically a +1. I was accompanying my dear wife, Bailey, who you know very well. And it was the opening reception, and I happened to be sitting on the same table as you, right beside you. And when you and I started chatting, it went from probably 3 seconds of small talk into unpacking generational trauma, talking about abuse, talking about our hopes for the future, talking about divine alignment. I mean, I could not believe the conversation that we were having within a second. And I thought to myself, who is this person? Mm-hmm. I feel like I've known you my entire life. And I know that everybody within the expansion community subscribes to the metaphysical. They do believe in spirituality. They do believe in energy exchange. And I'm just so excited to be able to have this connection with you. It's us speaking in human form over here, but if the last episode of Sage Advice was any indication of what this one is going to be like, very quickly we're going to find that the cameras and the microphone disappears, and it's just 2 people who've known each other for a very long time having a conversation. On that note, I want to offer you a gift. It is my favorite part of this episode, or the show, I should say, where I get to do something a little off script and offer you a gift that I've thought very deeply about with regards to you. So I'm so glad to know that you are not as familiar with the work of Christopher Nolan. So you have not seen the movie The Prestige, have you?
No, I have not.
Even better, because the first thing that I have for you here is the book that inspired the movie. This is The Prestige by Christopher Priest, which was then adapted by Christopher Nolan's brother and then turned into a movie starring Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale.
Wow.
This is for you, my friend.
Thank you so much. I am so excited. I believe that books show up in your life when you need them the most. So the fact that you thought about this and this is in my hands right now, I'm so excited.
And I'll tell you why, and I'm excited that you're excited. I thought very long and hard about this because you are one of the only people I know who could possibly resonate with an aspect of this story that I don't think the average person picks up on. So, spoiler alert, you're free to tune out of the podcast and join back in about 2 minutes. But, I can't spoil it for you, though. Okay, so...
Spoil it.
I don't know. So much of the appeal for this book for you was that you get to discover it. But I'll just give you like a quick synopsis. It's a series of journal entries that span time. So time is right away a big factor. In all of Christopher Nolan's works, he deals with past, present, future, and they mesh together. And sometimes they don't. And then this book in particular deals with duality, specifically in the form of children. It deals with twins. It deals with singletons. It deals with multiples. There's a lot of time, trauma, generational conversations that play out against the backdrop of magic. So there's like a supernatural element to this. And then there's people dealing with the idea of identity, shared identity, individual identity, and ultimately a big focus of your work, which is love and attachment.
Wow.
Things that happen in childhood that continue to play out over time across generations and jump from person to person. And I'm not going to spoil this, but they also jump in ways that are unpredictable. So that is for you, my friend.
Wow. Wow. I I cannot wait to dive into it.
And I can't wait to have a conversation with
Yeah.
you about what insights you were able to glean from this and how they map onto your own life story,
Mm,
which I'd love to get into, my friend.
let's do it.
I'm so curious to know what you would describe as the inciting force in your story. And what I mean by that, for those who are unfamiliar with that terminology, if you're thinking about the hero's journey, which is everybody's journey, it always starts the same, which is once upon a time
Mm.
there was. And every day they did whatever, until one day. And I love that until one day. For me, there were a couple of until one days, like until one day my boss pulled me into his office and said, I can't believe you did that TEDx talk. I'll go and apologize to everyone. And that set me down one path. Another until one day is, when my dad really got upset at me when I was being a bit of a wastrel in high school. And he said, you're never going to amount to anything. And I said, Pops, I'll show you. And I joined the Canadian Armed Forces, like true story. I'm curious to know what your until one day was.
Yeah, great question. And it's kind of twofold. It's twofold because I can remember very clearly, in my younger years, maybe even grade 3, like not even quite into adolescence yet, but already thinking about adolescence and that time. And I've always been just so fascinated by human development. Like, why are people the way that they are? Why do people respond the way that they do? Why are some people so social and others retreat inwards? Why are there these discrepancies? And, I think until very recently, actually, despite being in the field for as long as I have been, it never really clicked to me that I was on this quest to really understand myself while just trying to, really navigate these systems to help. And I've always been drawn to wanting to help people or, wanting to offer whatever wisdom I have gained over time to other people.
Yeah.
And you never really stop to think about why.
No.
Because life is just so busy and you just
Sure.
kind of go with, well, this is how I've always been.
Yeah, especially when you're a mother of 3.
Yes.
I imagine your time is less than limited.
But you find a way where it's not so limited anymore when you figure out what you actually want to do or where you want to spend your time. And when you're more intentional about where you're putting that time and moving away from that busyness or that hustle energy. So yeah, I mean, 3 kids is a lot and I won't sugarcoat that, but they're also everything and they can also give me so much energy and purpose in life.
That's beautiful. And I imagine that, we're going to keep on talking about kids, and eventually I can't wait to get into attachment theory, which is just so fascinating to me. Bailey made a connection via email recently for us and said, the two of you should talk, which I was already drafting an email to you just on that same subject, which is there's not a lot being said about the relationship between attachment theory and leadership.
Right.
What was it that brought you on this journey? When you go far back enough in Janany's story, was there a specific moment where like the universe bent and nudged you in this direction that brought us to this episode today?
Yeah, absolutely. I, again, being in the work that I'm in, and when people get into work like I do, when we're dealing with mental health, when we're, therapists or psychiatrists, or really, again, so fascinated with understanding the human brain and why people are the way that they are, I strongly believe that people in these professions are pulled into these areas because of some of their own stuff. And, all the therapists out there might disagree, but I really do think we're brought into these professions to be the people that we needed at some point in our lives, but never were able to receive that sort of support or comfort in our environment in some capacity. So for me, when I look at the course of my career and where things really pivoted to, again, being here, having this conversation today, is the discovery of my own trauma, that I had completely dissociated. I had
Wow.
absolutely no idea
What?
that what had happened to me in childhood had impacted why I was the way that I was.
I'm getting chills because it was just last night. It was one of those nights I just couldn't fall asleep. I'm actually staying with my parents while I'm in town. And I'm staying in a house where, my mom listens to the show. I think my dad's going to watch this as well. And so I'm just going to be honest and not sugarcoat it. There were times growing up in that particular house that were very difficult for me. I experienced things that I don't think a child, a teenager, a young adult, a person should have to experience. And so there's still in the fabric of, the couch and the bed and the walls and the ceiling, there's, for lack of a better word, ghosts. And last night I was having a tough time falling asleep because I started to feel young and vulnerable again. I didn't feel like the Hamza sitting before you. So I open up Reddit. Big mistake, right? Just doing a little bit of scrolling, seeing what's happening in the world of the NBA and WWE, movies, video games. And I'm also subscribed to Parents of Multiples. And I'm for reasons that I'll have to maybe discuss in future episodes of the show. And one of the questions or one of the threads was, what is something that you wish you knew about trauma? Or like, what are some, I think the question was like more or less, what are some things that you didn't know were traumatizing until recently? And I'm not sure capturing the essence of that question quite correctly, but one of the top responses was growing up in a household where you were constantly cut off or you had to bear witness to things that you shouldn't have that play out in your adult life. And I don't think I had the language until I was reading those comments in the middle of the night to be like, wow, so much of who I am is informed because of shit that happened a long time ago. I grew up in a household where the communication style was at times chaotic, where people would talk over each other, where in order to make myself feel heard, I had to learn how to listen for those pauses, increase the sort of bass in my voice, practice inflections and select incisive words to be able to be heard. And so part of me is like, damn, did I become a keynote speaker because I had to learn how to assert myself in a house that couldn't hear me? Maybe. And is my work in skill development, leadership development, a direct result of perceiving at low resolution that there was unskilled communication and a lack of tools in my childhood that at the very least let me sort of accept or neglect trauma? Long-winded way of saying shit starts early and plays out in real time. And, as much as you're comfortable sharing, that connection between the trauma that you had disassociated from and how that played out into the journey that you're on right now. What was the connection there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying this is the therapist in me. Yes, absolutely. The things we experience in early lives come up at different points in our life as adults, right? And I think the beautiful thing about what you shared is you have the awareness, you have the capacity to now bear witness to some of these things that have happened. And even though it's so awful to go back and to bear witness to these things, it really starts this journey of curiosity. I wonder if because I had to find these ways to assert myself or to interject in order for my voice to be heard, I wonder if that's why I turned out to have a career in keynote speaking.
One big trauma response, essentially. And I think that was the question on Reddit. It was like, what is one thing that you now recognize that's a trauma response? And I'm like, damn, maybe my entire life is a big trauma response.
But the beautiful thing about that is you get to decide, right? Now that you have this knowledge, do you want to stay there? And, I really do believe that our pain really gives us purpose. And oftentimes we find ourselves down these paths, even if we're not aware of it.
Right.
So coming back to me, and where things really shifted for me is in the last couple of years where, being in the field that I'm in, we're exposed to a lot of trauma. We have a lot of people, we have the privilege of a lot of people sharing really deep secrets or stories or their backgrounds with us. And in that, I also take a lot of accountability and responsibility for my training of really deeply wanting to understand how to work with people in a way where we're not re-traumatizing people. And I don't say that lightly, because if we're not properly trained, we have the potential to do more harm. And when we're re-traumatizing for folks with trauma, they're reliving that trauma as if it's happening for the first time.
It's fresh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a lot of suffering. And, I remember attending different trainings and having certain reactions. So one of the indicators, or one of the things to be curious about when you're looking at trauma, is, do people have a good recollection of their childhoods? Are there parts of their childhood that they don't remember? Are there big gaps that they don't remember? And I remember thinking, my memory sucks. And it still does as an adult. But, I had kids and I was thinking, okay, it must be, pregnancy brain, or things just not coming back online, when you're home caregiving for an
stressed,
infant.
I'm burning out,
Exactly.
whatever. Yeah.
And I remember also having a really repulsive reaction to something that I was doing at home that I had always kind of done. And I won't really provide the details of that, in a way where I do find myself still wanting to protect the identity of the perpetrator. And, I found myself doing something in the home, and I had this repulsive reaction where I flung an object. And I remember thinking, that's weird.
That's not me.
That's not me. And I've dealt with this object before. Why am I having this response? And there were other things going on at the time. This was maybe we're looking at about 5-6 years ago. And there were other kind of crisis moments going on in my family that I thought, nope, I can't deal with this right now. I'm going to park it. And I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew that I was putting this in a box, closing it up, and putting it away. And guess what? It worked. It worked. For 5 years, it never resurfaced.
It was survival.
It was survival. And it was almost, our brains are so fascinating, but it was the lie I was telling myself. And it allowed me to continue living life, growing in my career, becoming a trauma therapist at work, and going on to my journey of having my twins. And then in the last 2 years, I, in speaking to a friend, she disclosed something to me. And it all came flooding back at this point.
A trigger.
Yeah. A trigger, a memory, and a very specific memory. Not having all the details, though.
Okay.
So then you get into, could this be true? Am I making this up? And for anyone listening that's in the field, we know that no one would ever really make up a story so horrific.
No.
And I was convincing myself that this was not true, but the triggers would keep coming. So just like you were describing, being in your childhood home, I couldn't pass certain buildings. I couldn't look at certain pictures.
Yeah.
This panic, this unbelievable panic would take over in my body, and my body was reacting.
Yeah, your nervous system was just having its own conversation.
Exactly. And I've always had a little bit of anxiety, growing up, and it served me. It allowed me to really achieve the things that I did.
Right.
But this anxiety was panic. And it was like nothing I've ever experienced before. And as much as I tried to push it down, not give it the attention, it kept resurfacing and resurfacing and being triggered in areas where I would never have been triggered before.
Yeah.
And for someone who also experiences trauma, you want control.
Yeah. You wanna control those external factors that are producing the stress.
Exactly. So I'm like, what the heck is happening?
Yeah.
I can't anticipate when I'm going to have a panic attack. I don't know what's going to trigger me.
Yeah.
I got to deal with this now.
Shit.
And I did the hard work.
Yeah. You excavated. You went deep. You fastened your rope, and then you spelunked all the way down into the subconscious. You went to the abyss, didn't you?
I did.
And that journey is a crazy one. I don't use that word a lot.
Yeah.
But that journey, some people don't come back from it, man. Some people are still there right now.
I have the chills when you say that.
Yeah.
You know, it's like nothing I have ever experienced. And I've had my share of hardship up to this point, you know, with the pregnancy loss and fertility.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. This was trauma, panic, depression, grief. It was exactly a cocktail of everything.
Yeah. Reminds me of my party phases when we would just try to achieve a vibe as quickly as possible, and we mixed a lot of things that we shouldn't have mixed. And we paid the price.
Yeah.
My friend, you're bringing up a lot for me, and thank you for your vulnerability here. I know how difficult it is to even engage at the depths that we're engaging. I know that we can go so much deeper over here, but you know, out of respect for the people involved in our respective stories, I think it would be wise for us to maybe, you know, transition from this part of the conversation. But you know, in saying that, it's a yes and not a but. I also recognize that for me specifically, I grew up in a context, so South Asian. My parents are from the subcontinent, and I grew up in a culture where the adage was shared that things that happen at home stay at home.
Yeah.
You don't talk about what happens in the family outside of the family. And you described that box earlier. And so much of my trauma, I was instructed to leave in the box. And I did so for too long until that box started to overflow. Things started coming out of the box. You know, things started growing around the box. Eventually, I couldn't see the box anymore. The box was overrun by all the tangle, the bramble, the animals, the creatures, the demons, everything that, you know, it just became an unruly garden. So if I may share, for the purpose of our healing and, you know, for the viewers and the listeners here, something that, you know, Janany, you've alluded to here is recognizing those triggers, being sensitive to them and how it presents in your body. If I can just share one thing that might be useful for the group here. And I say this with a lot of love and compassion and understanding for my mom and my dad, but I grew up in a household where at times my mom and my dad would find themselves in situations where they could not pay attention to me and my sister because they were having their own disputes. And sometimes these disputes would spill over into arguing, yelling, shouting, discord that would sometimes carry on for hours, sometimes days. And so a trauma response that I developed to help me sleep at night was I would close the door, I would put in earplugs, I would sometimes put on noise-canceling devices, I would, you know, put a toque on and do everything to silence the voices of my caregivers who were at odds with each other, and that's putting it lightly. And when that wasn't enough, I had to do this thing where I had to pretend that the voices that I was hearing upstairs was wind. It was people outside. It was something else, but it wasn't my mom and dad. And how that plays out in my adult life now is that I can't sleep without white noise. I actually have to have noise on to remind me that it's okay, like I'm safe here.
Yeah.
So I would just encourage, you know, the viewers and the listeners to look for those things that you're uncomfortable and unsure about in the present and ask yourself, like, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
And be prepared to do the work. Be prepared to maybe have to go explore the depths of your subconscious, to go into the abyss and discover a truth that you might have suppressed because of your inability to control things as a child.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I think, again, just how miraculous our brains are, right? As young children, what it is capable of doing in order to protect us. And, moving into adulthood, I think this is the part, at least for me, that was so confusing, because when our brains are overwhelmed or our systems are overwhelmed in places where it's not safe, it responds in a number of different ways. And one of the ways of responding is lying to ourselves or using our imagination to make things be better. Right? And that can really mess with you as an adult, because now you have to figure out, who are you trusting? Which voice, and I say, I say voice, it could be a part of us. It could be really that inner child. But which voice are we listening to? Right? And are we going to continue to listen to the story that we've told ourselves in those younger years as a way of safety? Or is that holding us back in some capacity?
Yeah. So, Janany, you became then aware that something was awry, that there was memory lapses. Like you said, my memory sucks, but at the same time, I'm this highly competent educator, speaker, personality, researcher. I mean, like, there's something that's not computing over here. I'm so highly functional in every aspect of my life, but for some reason, my memory sucks. And so you pull at that, and it eventually takes you to a source of truth that you had long buried. And that sent you all the way back to us. You were like, whoa, I've touched darkness. I've touched the heart of darkness. I now have a responsibility to come back to the present and not only sort of end maybe cycles of generational trauma, but empower my community, starting with my own family, to live differently. In that journey, speaking of voices, was there any voice from a sage, a mentor, maybe a quote you read, a song you listened to? Was there any like sage advice that helped you along that journey?
Yeah, so that journey over the last 2 years has really helped me develop my spirituality.
Okay.
And the biggest spiritual teacher that I had during that time is Gabby Bernstein.
Shout out to Gabby.
Yes. She, her work is incredible, and it's done in a way where you're just able to understand on such a simple level around, as you started this podcast saying, like divine alignment or the universe, or you want to call it God, your higher self, love, whatever it is.
Yeah. Causality, whatever. Yeah.
There's something there.
Yeah. There's a pattern.
Right. And when we can trust that a lot of what has happened or is happening is leading us to our purpose, it allows things to be a little bit easier. And I think getting into Gabby's work allowed me to realize that there's more to this. This discovery is not just for myself, but this discovery of spirituality is, for me, how can we blend and shift traditional mental health treatment that's often very evidence-based with this line of spirituality. And in diving into Gabby's work, I got introduced to internal family systems, which is a type of therapy. Have you heard of it?
I have not. No. Please illuminate us.
So, internal family systems, was nothing that I was ever exposed to in my work here. It was through Gabby and her really sharing how much that therapy helped her that I decided, hey, let me look at this. And I think, this is also the part of me that wants to continue to achieve or bury myself in, give me the literature. Let me learn about this. Not so I can help myself, maybe a little bit, but let me help other people, right?
Nice.
So I began looking at this therapy, and it's developed by a man named Richard Schwartz. And he developed this model with the understanding that all of us have these parts in us. So, traditionally, there's the diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder,
Yeah.
where there could be multiple personalities. We're not looking at it in that way. We're looking at it in the way that as humans, we have multiple parts of us that have developed over time.
Right.
For example, for you, that part of you that came out when you were in that childhood home, feeling those things again. That little boy is still there.
Still there.
Right?
And still feels those things vividly.
Right. Right. And that's actually, I like to say one of the superpowers of people who have experienced trauma, because we have grown up on such high alert that we are so cognizant of so many things that people would not even have paid a second look at.
Hypervigilance.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, but we can really use it to our advantage.
Right.
So going back to IFS, it's this understanding that we all have these different parts in us, and they've developed, again, because of the experiences that we've had, oftentimes traumatic experiences. And what happens to these parts of us is they get frozen or stuck at the age of trauma.
Wow. Okay.
So what happens is when you're living your daily life and you're triggered, these parts get activated.
Interesting.
And they come up to surface. And the reason they come up to surface is because they are trying to protect that little child in us that experienced the trauma.
You have just explained the behavior of so many of the people in my life who, up until this point, I could not pinpoint why they act out the way that they do. And there's just somebody very recently who I encountered where, I found myself getting irritated by a certain behavioral tic of theirs. This one specifically was like, not oversharing necessarily, but like they were taking up a lot of space in conversation. And something that I'm cognizant of, hyper cognizant of, because I have experienced the opposite of that.
Of course.
I have been diminished. I have been sort of like suppressed in terms of being able to speak, which is why when I go on stage and I speak, sometimes feels traumatizing to me because I'm like, wow, I'm speaking a lot more than I'm used to speaking right now, and I get in my head. But this person specifically slips into patterns where she speaks a lot. She speaks over people. She cuts them off. Sometimes she ends up having conversations with herself while you're in the space with her. But knowing what I know about her childhood, she was just like me. She grew up in a household where her voice was diminished, where if she didn't assert herself and speak up, then she would lose the ability to advocate for herself. And now I see it based on what you said with internal family systems. Whenever I speak with her and somebody is imposing themselves or some external factor is making her feel less control, she goes back to that frozen age.
Yeah.
And then as an adult starts to protect her inner child.
Right.
And you're now, thank you, you're allowing me to have more compassion for her. The next time I see her, I think I'm going to look at her very differently.
Yeah, and a lot of times we're just not aware, right? These parts get activated and you have no idea that they're activated because we look at all of it as just, this is who I am.
Yeah.
But if we can begin to separate these different parts of us, for me, like the one that is so evident for me is my producing or achieving part, right? And because I've done the work, now I understand I needed to achieve and excel in my academics and bury myself in my work as a way to survive.
Wow.
Because had I not busied my mind so much with all of this intellectual knowledge, I would have remembered possibly what had happened to me at an earlier age.
This is so interesting. And like you've opened up some duality here that I'm really excited for you. Once you read The Prestige, I mean, like everything we're talking about, there's like I know I'm going to revisit this conversation after watching The Prestige and after you read this. Come back to this conversation because there's like a meta conversation. We're speaking about each other, but like when you watch this movie, when you read this book, you're going to start to see these themes come up again and again and again. And like it's been visualized in a way that will help people understand duality and that disassociation. Right? Like you said the D word, which is a huge spoiler in the movie. Disassociation, right? You know, I go back to the sage advice that you received from Gabby Bernstein, which is essentially what happened is leading to purpose. One way to look at that is we can understand what happened in the past, but then also what's not clear is what is our purpose that's still unfolding in real time. And what I love about the expansion crew with Hina is that you speak the language of abundance and moving away from survival, moving away from scarcity towards thriving and abundance. So now you've done the work, you've come back from the abyss, you're in the present. How are you envisioning your purpose now? Like, how are you seeing the future of Janany and Janany's work as it pertains to creating abundance?
Wow, what a rich question. Oh my goodness, where do I even start with that? I think, where I envision myself, and it possibly goes back to the Whistler retreat. And I don't know if you've seen clips of it, but the speaker that Hina had starting us off,
Firestarter.
Sanika, yes.
The Rock.
Oh my goodness. What a force that man is.
Man.
What an incredible human. He entered the room with a dominating presence.
Of course.
That, I say dominating, but not in a way that's like, oh my goodness, like aggressive, and you don't want that energy. It's dominating in the sense of you have to look in.
Yeah.
Like there's no escaping.
Yeah.
You got to go in.
There's a physical presence.
Yes.
It's like,
And when he looks at you, it's like he looks to your soul.
Right.
And what a gift he has. But I remember that point where he asked us, why are we here? And I've actually used that in one of my talks more recently because I thought, what an incredible way to have people look inwards to figure out you could be anywhere in the world. Why are you here?
Why are you here? Yeah.
And at that moment, I realized that I'm here to give voice to that little girl in me that could not speak up. And that has been, you speak of duality, that has been something that I'm still struggling with. That, as you said, you grow up in a South Asian household and everything stays under the rug. You keep everything in your four walls. Yet I have this little girl that I feel in me that needs a voice.
Wow.
And I know that voice is not just for me, that this voice that I have, and I have goosebumps all over me.
Yeah, thank you.
Is for a larger purpose.
Yeah.
And I may not know what that big purpose is, but I know part of it now is being okay sharing my story and being comfortable with the idea that people may now not just see me as someone who has all these accolades. And now I'm coming out and saying that I have some childhood trauma, specifically childhood sexual abuse.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
And this is the first time that I'm sharing this publicly as well.
Thank you.
But I have to be okay with however people receive that, because there's this inner force, this inner drive in me that is beyond me. And it might sound crazy.
Does not, yeah.
But it's bigger than who I am.
My friend, first of all, I'm just so sorry that you endured that. but from the bottom of my heart, and I say this on behalf of everybody privileged enough to tune in to your sharing of sage advice, thank you. There's not enough light that is shown on this type of trauma, let alone with all of the intersectionality at play here. Like in the South Asian community,
Absolutely.
for those two things to be discussed, it's as taboo as you get. Like if there was like a taboo hierarchy, this is all the way up at the top.
Yeah.
But knowing what we know about the statistics of this, it is shockingly prevalent.
So prevalent. And that's why my voice comes out, because the more people that I started talking to, or the more I started diving into trauma and wanting to understand, how could someone do this? Someone that I knew, someone who, I was close to, that I respected. And how could it be so opposite to all the characteristics that I thought they had?
Right.
And what I've come to understand is that trauma is trauma.
Trauma is trauma, man.
So
that is a quote right there.
whether you have been abused physically, sexually, emotionally, whether you've experienced war, whether you've lost a parent, trauma is trauma.
Yeah.
And what we know about trauma, unhealed trauma, is that the cycle continues.
Wow. This is thank you. Like, thank you for giving form to something that people are experiencing in silence. I mean, you so effortlessly, and it appeared effortless. I know it wasn't. Earlier in this conversation, you alluded to pregnancy loss, which has been a big theme of my and Bailey's life. Something that I was suppressing until Bailey said, I need to share the story. And she sort of forced my hand by posting about this online. She said, I need to process this. This is who I am. I am somebody who has experienced loss. And once she did that, then all of the mutuals started reaching out to me, being like, Hamza, I'm so sorry you went through that. And now I had to face this onslaught of my world responding to this thing. And you just shared something that was just so incredibly powerful. I thank you for having the courage to do so. I promise that you are giving permission to a lot of people, including myself, to be honest about parts of their past that they're repressing. I was blown away by a statistic recently that said one of the most common forms of sexual assault happens within marriages. And that blew my mind. I was like, oh my goodness, this is a can of worms I don't want to open up, because, at some point, we as a community have to move past holding on to these things because of some outdated notion of culture that comes at the expense of our healing. Like for you and I to heal,
right,
we have to be able to speak about this openly. And like I have personally experienced things, and I have bore witness to things that still haunt me. So thank you for just even just opening the door for us. You're through the work that you're doing. You're providing such a light for people who are in the abyss, who are in the dark, who maybe are spelunking and trying to excavate parts of themselves and can't see a way up. And so for you, in your power and your intersectionality, to be here and to so confidently articulate yourself with such a depth of scholarship and practitioner and lived wisdom, I promise there's people, including myself, who are like, man, like Janany, like keep that light on, because we need to find our way back home.
I appreciate that so much. And, the environment that you create here allows for conversations like this to flow. So I thank you for who you are and wanting to shed light on really some of the most darkest moments of people's lives in a way to really foster that hope. And that is maybe my purpose, right? If I can just inspire one person to recognize that the darkness that you're in right now, I get it, not just clinically, but personally, how bad it is, and to even contemplate not wanting to be here.
Oof, man.
And having kids and knowing the impact it would have on them, but that thought still coming, if I could just lend hope to one person that on the other side of that, you transform into the person you're truly meant to be, and you're transformed in a way where you're not living in survival and your body actually feels calm and peaceful. Oh my goodness. My work would be done if it could just inspire one person.
And you are doing it. You are doing it at the cutting edge, my friend. One of the sort of big draws for bringing you on the show was like, I study leadership, the psychology of leadership, and I find that, the existing literature is a bit shallow. It stops really at like the furthest it gets in terms of like why leaders behave the way that they do. It talks about loss. It talks about, if we're looking at the conservation of resources theory, that's one thing. It talks about trauma. It's beginning to talk about trauma, but not a lot. If anything. I mean, I looked this up 2 days ago. I'm like, what are the books on this topic? What are the research papers on this topic? Scant. And then you shot me an email being like, yo, we should connect here, because if we understand that childhood attachment informs how you behave as adults, and if we're at this gap where we can't understand why some leaders behave the way that they do, I can visualize a chasm over there. Just go from childhood attachment to leadership. There is a connection there. For the listeners and viewers who don't know what attachment theory is, how would you best describe this for a layperson?
Oh, my favorite question. And I light up. I love attachment theory.
Yeah.
And I love it so much because it allows people to understand why they are the way that they are without judgment. And I say without judgment because these styles are formed at such a young age, right? So how could we judge a little 6-year-old for being in the attachment style that they're in? So when we look at attachment style, there's 4 types of attachment styles. The first is your secure attachment. And your secure attachment is great. In a household where you are securely attached to your primary caregivers, you have received physical and your emotional needs. These needs have been met. You feel safe. And when I say safe, you feel safe not just physically, but emotionally. So you were able to talk about your feelings. If you had a bad day at school, you could go to mom or dad or even grandma, whoever it was that was primarily caring for you. You were able to have these conversations and to not be shut down about it, to not be ridiculed about it, not feel shame about it. These individuals grow up to be, very well adjusted. And I say well adjusted in a sense where you're balanced, right? You're able to feel the really bad things and the really good things and move past them without getting stuck. About 58% of the population is securely attached.
Interesting.
So that's a large portion of us that are not.
It's so interesting that my mind didn't go to that. I was like 58%. That's
Pretty
pretty good.
good,
But
yeah.
you're right. If the rest are not securely attached, what are those other 3 types?
Right. And, I really should go back to the literature to see if it's changed at all. I would argue that that number is higher than maybe what we actually see. However, when we look at the other 3 attachment styles, we have the first one being the anxious attachment style. And if you are someone who falls in this category, in childhood, what this might have looked like was that your needs were met some of the time. So maybe you could go to mom or dad and talk about what you were feeling, and sometimes they were receptive, and other times they were not. Maybe other times they were preoccupied with their own stuff. Maybe sometimes, when you fell or you were sick, your parent took care of you. Other times they didn't. So what a child ends up learning, and again, when we look at children, they're very egocentric. So it's about me, right? There's something about me, and that's why my needs are not always met. So let me try to figure out what I can do to get my needs met.
Right.
So that's where this hypervigilance comes online, because this young child is moving to try to survive. And part of that survival is, how do I get my needs met? And it's very confusing for a little one, where needs are met sometimes and not others.
Right.
So these are people who grow up into adulthood, having that anxiety. And when we look at it from an attachment of how we connect and relate to others, someone with an anxious attachment style really craves closeness to people, whether it be romantic relationships, friendships,
Sure.
even in the workplace. The second one is called avoidant attachment.
Uh-huh. That's mine.
Avoidant attachment style is primarily developed because as a young child, your needs were not met. Your emotional needs were not met.
Wow.
So you had a bad day at school, you couldn't go to mom or dad. They would kind of dismiss it, shut it down. Your traditional, don't cry, right?
Go pray.
Yes. Or I'm going to pray for you.
Oof,
right.
Yeah. Suck it up. Yeah. Life's hard.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. We could go on about that forever. But these young children end up realizing that their needs are not important. And they have suppressed their emotions and their needs. So these individuals find it difficult to actually get close to people, and get close to people because of what that could actually mean for them in terms of why they developed certain patterns of independence, right? I'm only going to depend on myself, because as a young child, you couldn't depend on anybody else, right? Versus when we look at that anxious attachment style, sometimes you could depend on other people. So this individual grows up, the avoidant attachment style grows up being very independent and almost fearing getting too close to people because of what that might do internally for them. If I begin trusting or depending on someone, what does that actually mean, right? So we become separated from what our true needs, wants, desires, emotions are. The last category is what we call disorganized attachment style. And it's a blend of the two. It's a blend of the two where sometimes we seek closeness and proximity. Sometimes maybe we're a little bit anxious, but at other times we shut down.
It's kind of like a mix of anxious and avoidant.
Yeah, exactly. And this attachment style is developed for children who have experienced oftentimes trauma, having a parent or a parental figure who has mental health challenges, addictions, incarceration,
Wow.
the loss of a parent. So, I would beg to differ that many of us actually do fall into that category.
I see myself more in that category now.
Yeah. And the reason why I want to shed light on that is because it can come with so much shame to fall under that category. But really, it's our way of protecting ourselves. And if we can just understand that we developed these ways of being as a form of protection in childhood when we couldn't rationalize or logically understand anything, how incredible that we know, humans are wired for connection and love and belonging. But when that feels not safe, like maybe that need can't get met, we shut down.
Janany, you are blowing my mind. Like, this is as punk as it gets when it comes to leadership. Like you, I'm on the speaker circuit. I'm right there with people who are advancing the profession, who are speaking about and thinking about researching how to reinvent leadership, how to disrupt it. And after a while, like, you start to see kind of like what the layer of modern leadership looks like. you are in the year 2045. Like you have traveled back from time, because this shit right here, and I'm reserving my cursing for this impassioned celebration of you. This shit right here, every leadership scholar is going to end up at this. Mark my words. Like we're recording this in 2025. I'm going to say it first. Janany Jayanthikumar is a pioneer of when it comes to the connection between leadership and attachment styles. You sharing 58% are secure. That maps out almost identically onto the prevalence of dark core, dark triad traits in the workplace. So you look at narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy as overrepresented in the C-suite, but people can't understand why. Well, guess what, executives? Do the work. Go back to your childhood and understand that maybe your physical and emotional needs weren't met. Maybe understand that you had a traumatic childhood. Maybe understand that you had a parent that was mentally ill, unwell, that was addicted, that was incarcerated, etc. And if that exploration scares you, number one, it's okay.
Yeah.
It should.
Yeah.
But please use this conversation as permission to do that, because in not doing that, you are unhealed. And because you are unhealed, you are perpetuating that kind of violence, for lack of a better word, in your workplaces, in your community groups, in your faith groups, so on and so forth. You're doing it, man. I'm just so proud of you. And for this perspective to come from somebody that's not just taking a scholarly interest in it, but is actually like, there's a story of triumph here. Like you are doing the work yourself. So like we can get rid of the frameworks, we can get rid of the literature, we can get rid of, all of the body of work that has gone into this formulation of knowledge, and you can speak about this with the humility, the candor, and like the bravery that you're speaking with it right now. I'm just so proud of you, my friend.
Thank you.
And I hope that we get to collaborate on something.
Yes,
I really do.
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny that you said exactly what you said. And in terms of like, I'm 20 years ahead.
Easily.
Because I often feel that. I feel that my way of thinking, I love my work, and I know it protected me dearly as a child, but I love research and I love developing and really wanting to understand, to shift things. And I find that when I go down this rabbit hole, and I say rabbit hole because you can easily get stuck in the databases of research, man. I'm like, why is there such a lack here?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
And it was actually, a conversation with your wife that made me realize maybe I'm just ahead.
You are.
Maybe I'm just ahead.
I promise you are. And I shared the working title for my next book that I'm working on with the first guest, Dr. Summer Zuffer, who you happened to meet in the lobby. And the book was called Love, Lions, and Leadership. Because when I asked the question, why did I burn out? Because my boss was toxic. Why was he toxic? Because he learned this pattern from somebody else. Why did he learn it from them? Because at that time, the dominant paradigm in workplaces was command and control. Why was it command and control? And I kept on pulling that thread, Janany, and I was losing my mind. For the last 4 years, I've compiled 300 pages of notes on answering the question, why did I burn out in the 2010s? And you know where it took me? It took me back to the African savannah when lions and humans were competing for territory. That's how far back my research took me. And I'm like, yo, I have lost it. How the fuck did how the fuck did I end up from burnout to lions versus humans? But there's something there about competition, fear, survival.
Right.
That has played out. And I'm like, I have gone too far in the past. And well, when I say too far, not for me. I get it. It's logically. Yeah. And in many ways, you have gone so far in the future where you understand it, but the average audience is like, I still don't get how my mom not giving me enough eye contact has made me a shitty manager.
Right.
But you get it.
Right.
And eventually the world is going to synchronize with this.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I do have 2 more questions to sort of round out the sage advice. Yeah. I'm realizing like we have gone on such a beautiful detour. But I think it was necessary for us to come back with true gusto for these last 2 questions that I have for you. You're punk when it comes to research and the work that you do, and I love that so much. You're dope.
I appreciate
If I may just like code switch a little here and just bring out the Scarborough in me, I'm just like, Dope, man. Just
Thank you.
what is some sage advice that you're wrestling with right now that feels true to you as a true pioneer, as somebody that's like on the fringes? What is something that is like, it's there, it's advice that you've been given, advice that you're considering, feels right, but hasn't quite crystallized yet?
Oh, yes. Okay, are you ready?
Bring it on.
That you are the creator of your world.
We don't have enough time in the schedule to consider this, but just give us more. I mean, like, you're going to come back for multiple episodes. I just know it, but break it down. You are the creator.
Yeah. So our minds, right, we know are so powerful. And clinically, I could always understand it in a way where, when we're feeling depressed or anxious, we tend to have more negative thoughts. We tend to have more inaccurate thoughts. And we work with these thoughts to restructure them to more accurate thoughts by pulling out facts that maybe counteract these thoughts. And then when I started getting into spirituality and trying to understand quantum physics and yeah, another rabbit hole, right? I'm like, how do we now begin to incorporate this? Because actually, this is what truly helped me transform. Not being stuck, like, yes, we got to go back. You say going back, to lions and humans. It's almost like we have to go a little bit back in order to understand. And there was this analogy that I saw on Instagram recently around manifestation and why maybe manifestations are not happening as quickly as we would like them. And it draws on this idea of you do need to go back to heal. And it was an analogy with a bow and arrow where you got to pull back a little.
Tension.
Yeah. So you got to go back to heal and deal with our crap. And then you get to fling forward and transform. And I thought, I need to develop something where we can go back safely, but not get stuck there, and transform our minds to think about what we actually want and focus on that, because our brains and our minds have so much power in creating the world that we live in.
Janany, I'm so pumped. As soon as this is done, let's just have a quick debrief and talk about like all of this, but also quantum physics.
Yeah.
You're right there because of where generative AI is right now. The next step is quantum computing. So if you look at like our technology as a reflection of the current zeitgeist, we have moved from the stage of binary to now being able to create patterns that are a few steps forward. Where the zeitgeist is moving next is quantum computing, which is there's no binary state anymore. There's multiple pathways that are opening up simultaneously. And we see this reflected in movies now, right?
Right.
Movies are now so flippantly engaging with this idea of the multiverse. Like the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe is there's multiple concurrent realities. And so if the average person can understand this, then we can just help them just take one more step in the direction of there's multiple concurrent realities. You as a leader now, when you show up tomorrow to work, you can behave in state A, state B, state C, all the way to Z simultaneously.
Right.
And if you can work with that level of complexity, boy, we are so close to healing the world.
Oh,
you see it. I know you see it. I know you see it.
And I'm so excited to have someone that gets it with me.
Man, and just for the record, viewers and listeners, we are not high. Like we are very sober right now. We're drinking water. We're having some cappuccinos, and we fully understand like there's a level of scholarly, like certitude when it comes to these subjects. But like I said, you're punk. You're on the fringe, my friend. In closing, let's play with this idea of like the arrow. So we pull back. We understand the journey that brought you here. And like the first piece of sage advice that you received that set you on this journey was what happened is leading to purpose. That brought you to the present, where you're exploring this idea of you are the creator of your world. Mm. The last question I want to leave with you is one that's going to really challenge, the reality that we're in right now. Just imagine for a second we're in this room and our dear Rodrigo, producer of the show, says, guys, there's a There's a comet heading to this studio right now, and it's about to end. So leave the sage advice that you want to leave for Isaiah, Christian, Mateo, that you want to leave for the rest of the world. The last piece of sage advice from Janany Jayanthikumar. What would it be?
My last piece of advice would be to trust your truth despite what the world tells you. The world wants to shrink you, but don't shrink.
Trust your truth. Don't shrink. If I may ask one follow-up question to that, beautiful, by the way, how do you think your lived experience shapes that wisdom?
It shapes it because of what we touched on earlier, where, when as young children you experience something so horrific, we use our minds as a way to cope and protect us. And what that can do internally to a person, where you're coming up with other realities as a form of protection. Like, maybe my caregiver was protective when really they weren't. It's a form of survival. And as you grow up in that state internally, what that does is it makes you question everything. What's really the truth? But you always knew the truth. You just had to protect yourself from it in those early years.
The light was always there.
The light was always there and still is.
Janany, I cannot thank you enough, my friend. You have offered us more than just insight and wisdom. You've offered us presence, integrity, and fortitude. I mean, truly, I am personally galvanized by this conversation. You've reminded us that healing is slow work. And we may never heal in one generation, but we can begin to loosen the grip. And maybe this work is about posterity. Maybe it's about the next generation. And we can try our very best. As Dr. Summer Zuffer said in the last episode, the opportunity to heal is always there, no matter what. You've also shared with us here that this begins when we start listening more deeply, when we turn inward, especially to ourselves, especially to our inner children, and to the outer children, should we be fortunate enough to have them in our lives, and to the parts of us that may still be hurting, that may still be recovering from what we've experienced in the past. May the seeds that you have planted today continue to grow in every listener who has heard you, including myself. And to all of you tuning in, thank you for joining us. May you carry forward a little more compassion and a little more courage as you write your own sage advice. Thank you, Janany.